When the storm tore roofs off houses and scattered lives across the valley, she thought she'd been left behind. But through flying debris and screaming wind, one dog refused to leave her side, even when the world itself seemed to blow away. The first gust came like a warning, rattling shutters and bending the trees in the yard until their branches creaked. By the time the second gust hit, the warning was gone. This was war. Miller's Creek had seen storms before, but never like this. The wind didn't howl, it screamed. It ripped shingles from roofs, hurled trash cans into the night sky, and tore power lines from poles like threads from a child's doll. Houses groaned as if they were alive, foundations quaking under the assault. Inside one of those houses, a little girl named Emily pressed herself against the wall of her bedroom. She clutched the edge of her quilt, eyes wide with terror as her world shook apart around her. The stuffed animals on her dresser had already been scattered, her lamp was shattered on the floor. Every bang of debris outside made her heart race faster. And then, beside her, Shadow moved. The German shepherd pressed his body against Emily's side, his chest rising and falling in calm rhythm despite the chaos. His ears twitched with every crash, but his gaze was fixed, not on the storm, but on her. His silent vow was clear: "You are not alone." Emily buried her face in his fur, sobbing. "Don't leave me." Shadow let out a low, steady bark, not frantic, not afraid. A promise. Outside, Daniel fought his way up the porch steps, the wind slamming against his chest like a wall. His uniform clung to him, soaked with rain that cut sideways through the air. He had just come from the South Ridge where the first houses had already blown apart, but his heart pulled him here, to the small house where he knew Emily and her grandmother lived. He shoved the door open, its hinges shrieking. "Emily," he shouted, voice swallowed by the wind tearing through broken windows. A muffled cry answered from the back of the house. Daniel surged forward, boots crunching on shattered glass. The hallway ceiling sagged, plaster raining down as another gust ripped shingles from the roof. He burst into Emily's room just as a tree limb crashed through the window, spraying glass and rain across the floor. The girl screamed, clutching Shadow tighter. "Got you!" Daniel yelled, scooping her into his arms. Shadow leapt to his side instantly, growling at the storm as though he could fight it tooth and nail. Emily trembled in Daniel's grip, sobbing into his shoulder. "The wind took everything," she cried. "It took my doll, it took my room, it's taking the house." Daniel pressed her close. "It's not taking you." The three of them huddled in the narrow hallway, the only place left with a ceiling that hadn't begun to tear away. Shadow planted himself in front of Emily, ears pinned flat, teeth bared at every crash. But the house was losing its battle. The roof groaned, then peeled back like the lid of a can. The howl of the storm filled the air, so loud Daniel could hardly hear his own thoughts. "We've got to move," he shouted over the roar. "The whole place is going." Shadow barked once, sharp, as if agreeing. He darted ahead into the kitchen where the door to the storm cellar lay half buried under fallen beams. Daniel shoved at the debris, muscles straining, every gust threatening to tear the house apart above him. Shadow growled, grabbed one of the smaller planks in his teeth, and pulled with a ferocity born of instinct. Together, man and dog cleared the way. Daniel yanked the cellar door open, its hinges shrieking. A rush of damp air rose from below. "Emily, go," he commanded. But the girl froze, eyes locked on the storm tearing her world away. Wind whipped her hair across her face, rain lashing her cheeks. She shook her head. "I can't." Shadow nudged her hand with his nose, barking softly this time, urging. He pressed against her, guiding her step by step until she clung to his collar. Daniel crouched low, voice steady despite the chaos. "He's got you. Trust him." With Shadow leading and Daniel lifting from behind, Emily descended into the cellar just as the last of the roof tore free with a deafening roar. The sound of splintering wood filled the night, followed by the terrifying emptiness of sky where their home had been. In the cellar, Darkness pressed close, broken only by Daniel's flashlight beam. Emily trembled, her face pale, but she was alive. Shadow lay pressed against her legs, a living wall between her and the world. Above them, the storm raged on, ripping through the town, scattering lives like leaves. But here, in the close damp air, there was a heartbeat pressed against hers, steady and warm. Emily whispered, "The wind took everything, except him." Daniel met Shadow's gaze in the dim light. The shepherd's eyes gleamed with a steady fire that no storm could blow out. And for the first time that night, Daniel let himself believe they might see morning. The cellar door slammed shut above them, the sound muffled by the shriek of the wind outside. For a heartbeat, silence filled the small underground room, broken only by Emily's ragged breathing and the hammer of rain pounding on the ground above. Daniel flicked his flashlight on, the beam cutting through the damp gloom. Dust motes swirled in the air. The cellar smelled of earth, mildew, and rusted tools. Cobwebs clung to the beams overhead. Emily clung to Shadow, burying her face in his wet fur. The shepherd didn't move, didn't flinch. His body was pressed against hers like a shield, every muscle taut, his ears straining toward the storm's roar above. He wasn't resting, he was listening. Daniel crouched down, his hand steady on Emily's shoulder. "You're safe here. Just breathe." Emily shook her head, tears streaking her dirt-smeared cheeks. "The wind, it took our house. It's going to take this too." Shadow let out a low growl, as if arguing. Daniel rubbed his temple, exhausted but firm. "No. This cellar is stronger than the house. It was built for storms like this. The wind can rip everything else apart, but not this." The words steadied her, a little. She pressed closer to Shadow, who gave a soft whine and licked her hand. Minutes passed like hours. The storm outside had no rhythm, no mercy. Sometimes it roared so loud the cellar walls quivered. Sometimes it lulled to a hollow moan, only to slam back into them with renewed fury. Dust trickled from the ceiling. The wooden beams creaked. Daniel checked his watch, though the hands blurred from fatigue. He tried the radio clipped to his vest, only static answered. No rescue crews, no reports, nothing but the hiss of empty air. He glanced at Emily, whose eyes drooped despite her fear, exhaustion weighing her down. Shadow lay half-curled beside her, but his gaze never softened. Daniel leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment. He remembered Afghanistan, nights when sandstorms buried entire convoys, when the wind screamed across the desert until you couldn't tell ground from sky. Back then, too, it had been the K-9 who gave men courage. The memory sharpened into resolve. He opened his eyes. "We'll outlast it. We always do." The storm shifted. A new sound rose above the roar, a low groan, deep and wrong. Daniel froze. He knew that sound. The ground itself was moving. "Stay down," he barked, pulling Emily closer. The cellar wall shuddered as if a giant hand pressed against it. Dirt sifted in heavy streams from the ceiling. A crack zigzagged across the far corner. Emily screamed. Shadow lunged forward, teeth bared, barking furiously at the shifting wall. Daniel's mind raced. If the storm uprooted a tree above them, it could crush the cellar. Or worse, the flood could break through and drown them before they had a chance to escape. "Emily, listen to me." His voice was sharp, urgent. "If I tell you to climb, you follow Shadow. Don't stop. Don't look back. Do you understand?" Her lip trembled, but she nodded. "Okay." Shadow barked once, as if sealing the command. The wall held, for now. But a steady leak began in the corner, a dark trickle of water winding across the dirt floor. Daniel crouched beside it, grimacing. The storm wasn't only above them, it was pressing from every side. He dug through an old crate, pulling out planks, nails, even a rusted hammer. Shadow trotted beside him, tail low, watching every move. Emily tilted her head, voice small. "What are you doing?" "Making sure the wind doesn't take this too," Daniel said. He wedged the planks against the crack, hammering with his fist when the old tool bent uselessly. The boards creaked but held, slowing the water to a drip. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't permanent. But it was something. Shadow sniffed the boards, then gave a sharp bark, as if approving. Hours dragged. Emily drifted in and out of uneasy sleep, jerking awake at every crash above. Each time, Shadow nosed her gently, calming her with his steady presence. Daniel paced the small space, flashlight beam catching every seam in the wood, every ripple in the dirt. He fought the pull of exhaustion with sheer will. When the storm reached its peak, the sound was apocalyptic. The cellar shook so violently Emily screamed again, clutching Shadow with both arms. Debris pounded the earth above, thudding like artillery shells. Daniel threw himself over both child and dog, arms braced against the quivering beams. "Hold on," he shouted, though he could barely hear himself. Shadow barked into the storm, one furious sound after another, daring the wind to try harder. His voice cut through the chaos, steady, defiant, unbroken. And then, sudden silence. The kind of silence that presses on the ears, so heavy it feels wrong. Daniel kept his body over them both, waiting. Was it the eye of the storm? Or the end? Shadow's ears twitched. His body relaxed a fraction. He whined softly, licking Emily's face. The girl blinked at Daniel. "Is it over?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Maybe." But deep in his gut, he knew the night wasn't finished testing them. The silence was almost worse than the roar. Emily clung to Shadow, her breath hitching, too afraid to speak above a whisper. The shepherd's ears flicked constantly, his body low but not trembling, eyes fixed on the cellar door as though it were a living thing. Daniel crouched nearby, flashlight beams sweeping over the cracked walls. The storm's fury had gone quiet, replaced by the soft patter of drips from the ceiling and the distant groan of broken wood above. "It stopped," Emily said finally, her voice trembling. "The storm, it stopped." Daniel studied the cracks, his jaw tight. "Maybe. Or maybe we're in the eye." Emily frowned. "What's the eye?" "The middle," he explained. "Sometimes storms spin so big they've got a quiet place in the center. Feels calm. Feels safe. But it's a trick. The other half comes next." Shadow whined low, like he was agreeing. Emily's lip quivered. "So it's not over?" Daniel shook his head. "Not yet. But we've got time. Time to get ready." He scanned the cellar. Supplies were almost non-existent, some broken crates, rusted tools, jars of pickled vegetables from who knows when. Nothing they could eat, nothing that would help much. The flashlight beam landed on a coil of rope hanging from a peg. Daniel grabbed it instantly, checking the fibers. "Old, but strong enough." "Shadow," he said, crouching to clip the rope onto the shepherd's harness. The dog stood still, patient, as if he understood the ritual. Emily tilted her head. "Why does he need that?" Daniel gave her a faint smile. "Because if the wind takes me, he'll bring me back." The girl blinked. "He can do that?" Daniel glanced at the shepherd. "He's done it before." They waited. The silence stretched on, broken only by the occasional rattle of loose boards above. Daniel's gut told him the storm was circling back. He could almost feel the tension in the air, the pressure building, the quiet before the blade fell again. Emily rested against Shadow, her small hand gripping his collar so tightly her knuckles whitened. The shepherd licked her cheek once, his tail flicking in reassurance. Daniel sat cross-legged, rubbing his bruised shoulders. He looked at Emily. "You know, when I was your age, I used to be afraid of the wind too." Thought it was some kind of monster. She sniffled. It is a monster. Daniel nodded slowly. Feels that way. But monsters can be beaten. You just need the right partner. He scratched behind Shadow's ears. Mine was always this guy. Emily gave a tiny smile, brushing her hand through the shepherd's damp fur. He didn't let go. No, Daniel said softly. He never does. The peace lasted maybe 20 minutes before the first sound returned. A low moan, far off, like the earth itself groaning. Then another, closer. The cellar door rattled, dust raining down from its frame. Shadow shot to his feet, barking once, sharp and urgent. Emily clutched Daniel's sleeve. It's back. The next gust slammed the cellar with the force of a cannon. Boards screamed overhead, debris crashing against what was left of the house. The crack in the wall split wider, a spray of dirt and water shooting into the room. Daniel's instincts took over. He pulled Emily into his chest, pressing her against the wall farthest from the crack. Shadow planted himself in front of them both, teeth bared, a growl rising above the wind. The storm howled, louder than before, as if furious at being defied. The cellar shook violently, the wooden beams creaking in protest. Emily buried her face in Daniel's jacket. It's worse than before. Daniel held her tighter, shouting over the roar. Listen to me. You don't move unless Shadow moves. If he goes, you go with him. Understand? She nodded frantically, tears streaking her cheeks. Shadow barked once, the sound slicing through the chaos like a promise. A violent crash split the air. Something massive slammed into the ground above them, maybe a tree, maybe half the roof. The cellar door buckled inward, wood splintering. Wind screamed through the gaps, flinging dust and leaves into the room. Emily shrieked. Daniel grabbed the rope still tied to Shadow's harness, wrapping the other end around his wrist. If that door blows, we move to the crawlspace. Tight corner, stronger ground. We hold there. The shepherd growled at the door, body stiff, every muscle taut as a drawn bow. The next gust made its decision. With a thunderous crack, the cellar door tore free, ripped into the storm like a leaf. Rain and wind cascaded down, a funnel of chaos blasting into the small room. Emily screamed, her hair whipping across her face. Daniel shielded her with his body, teeth gritted as the gale tried to drag them upward. Shadow leapt into the torrent, barking furiously, his stance wide, claws digging into the dirt floor. His weight and defiance made a living barricade, forcing the wind to fight him first. The shepherd wouldn't move. Wouldn't yield. Wouldn't let go. Daniel's throat tightened. He pulled Emily tighter against him, whispering into her hair even as the storm shrieked, "You're not alone. He's here. I'm here. We're not letting go." And above them, the monster howled, furious that its prey still stood. The storm roared down the open cellar like a beast unleashed. Dirt stung their skin as rain lashed through the ripped-out door. Every crash above felt like a giant's hammer, pounding wood and brick into splinters. Emily screamed into Daniel's chest, her tiny hands clawing at his jacket. He wrapped himself around her, bracing against the wall, but it was Shadow who stood between them and the chaos. The shepherd had planted himself at the opening, claws tearing furrows in the dirt, chest low, fur whipping sideways in the gale. His bark boomed into the wind again and again, not panic, but defiance. The walls trembled. A beam overhead gave way with a shriek, collapsing across the cellar entrance. The force sent a spray of mud and rain through the hole. Shadow dodged, then leapt back into position, barking even louder as if daring the storm to try harder. Daniel knew the truth, this cellar wouldn't hold. The cracks were widening, the ground itself rumbling under their feet. The house above was gone, and now the storm wanted what was left beneath it. "We can't stay here," Daniel shouted. His voice was nearly lost in the storm's howl. He pressed Emily tighter. "We've got to move." Emily shook her head violently, eyes wild. "No. It'll take us." Daniel grabbed her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "It won't. Not while he's with us." Shadow barked once, sharp and certain, as if to prove him right. Daniel scanned the cellar, flashlight beam flicking across broken shelves and dripping walls. In the far corner, where the earth dipped, a crawlspace led under the foundation. It wasn't much, but the ground looked firmer there, the beams thicker. "That's our way," Daniel muttered. He pulled Emily to her feet. "We're going. Hold on to Shadow's collar. Don't let go no matter what." Shadow barked and immediately trotted toward the crawlspace, rope dragging from his harness like a lifeline. Emily clung to his collar, stumbling as Daniel pushed from behind. The storm howled through the cellar, furious at their retreat. Another beam cracked, slamming into the dirt floor with a boom that rattled their bones. Mud cascaded from the ceiling, pelting their shoulders. "Hurry!" Daniel barked. The crawlspace yawned low and narrow, barely high enough for a grown man to crawl. Shadow squeezed in first, his body scraping dirt as he forced his way through. Emily followed on hands and knees, sobbing with fear but clutching the dog's harness. Daniel brought up the rear, shoving her forward when she faltered. Behind them, the cellar collapsed in a roar of dirt and wood. The sound was deafening, the air filling with choking dust. "Don't look back!" Daniel shouted, coughing. "Keep going!" The tunnel groaned as if alive, dirt raining onto their backs. Emily cried out when a clod struck her shoulder, but Shadow barked, pulling harder, refusing to slow. "Almost there," Daniel urged. His flashlight beam cut ahead, and at last, faint moonlight glimmered through a jagged hole at the tunnel's end. They burst out into the open air, stumbling into the storm's night. The world outside was unrecognizable. Where the house had once stood was nothing but rubble, splintered beams, shattered shingles, the twisted remains of furniture strewn across the mud. The wind tore through it all, shrieking triumphantly. Emily fell to her knees, sobbing. Daniel crouched beside her, shielding her with his body. Shadow stood over them, fur-drenched, chest heaving, but his eyes still locked on the storm. "We're out," Daniel said, voice hoarse. "We're alive." But the storm wasn't done. A tornado funnel loomed in the distance, its black shape twisting against the clouds, moving hungrily across the valley. Its low, monstrous roar made the ground tremble. It was heading straight for them. Daniel's stomach dropped. They had minutes, maybe seconds. "On your feet," he barked, scooping Emily into his arms. "Shadow, track high ground." The shepherd barked once, spinning toward the ridge behind what was left of the neighborhood. His paws churned mud as he bounded ahead, tail a beacon in the dark. Daniel ran after him, the storm clawing at every step. The tornado bore down. Its winds dragged pieces of the ruined house into the sky, doors, beams, even the twisted frame of the mailbox. The roar was deafening, a freight train tearing through the bones of the earth. Emily buried her face in Daniel's shoulder, screaming. "It's coming." "I know." Daniel grunted, forcing his legs to move faster. Shadow didn't falter. His bark cut through the storm, urging them onward, warning them when debris hurtled near. Once, a sheet of tin came slicing through the air. Shadow leapt sideways, knocking Daniel off balance just in time for the metal to miss his head by inches. Daniel hit the mud hard, pain lancing his side, but he held Emily tight. Shadow circled, barking furiously, pulling at Daniel's sleeve until he staggered back to his feet. The ridge loomed closer. Salvation, or maybe just higher ground to die on. But Daniel refused to give up. Not with Emily clinging to him. Not with Shadow fighting at his side. They reached the base of the ridge as the tornado closed in. Its funnel swallowed half the valley now, debris swirling in its maw like toys. The wind ripped at Daniel's body, trying to pull Emily from his arms. He locked his grip, teeth gritted. "Climb," he shouted, pushing upward. Shadow bounded ahead, claws tearing into mud, pausing only to bark encouragement. Emily sobbed into Daniel's chest, but she didn't let go. The storm's roar grew unbearable. The ground trembled like it would split open. And then, suddenly, they were over the crest. Daniel stumbled onto the ridge's far side, collapsing against the wet earth. Shadow pressed against his chest, teeth bared at the tornado still ripping the valley below. Emily buried her face in the dog's fur, trembling, whispering through tears, "He stayed. He never left me." Daniel stroked Shadow's back, his voice raw but steady. "He never will." The ridge was no safe haven, just higher ground with a clearer view of the nightmare below. From the crest, Daniel and Emily could see the tornado's funnel chewing through Miller's Creek, dragging entire houses into its swirling black throat. The roar drowned everything, louder than artillery, louder than fire. It was the sound of the earth itself tearing apart. Emily clung to Shadow's neck, her knuckles white. The shepherd stood braced in front of her, first snapping like a flag in the gale, teeth bared at the monster below. Daniel dropped to one knee beside them, forcing his voice calm even as the storm ripped at his soul. "We're above the flood, but not above the wind," he muttered. His eyes scanned the ridge. Trees bent dangerously. Branches snapped like bones. And then, through the haze of rain and dust, he spotted it, the outline of an old stone barn tucked against the hillside. Its roof was half gone, but the walls looked thick, stubborn. "That's our shelter," he said. "Move." They stumbled down the slope, every step a battle. The tornado's pull tugged at them like unseen hands, dragging them sideways, trying to suck them back into the valley. Emily screamed when her foot slipped in the mud. Shadow lunged, clamping her sleeve in his teeth, yanking her upright before the wind could take her. Daniel's chest burned as he fought to keep balance, Emily pressed tight against him. He felt every gust trying to peel her away, but Shadow anchored them, darting ahead, then circling back to pull with his harness rope. At last, they crashed through the barn's broken doorway, collapsing onto the dirt floor. Daniel shoved the door shut behind them, slamming a fallen beam across it. The stone walls groaned, but they held. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of hay long rotted. Shafts of rain cut through holes in the roof, but compared to the fury outside, it felt like stepping into another world. Emily curled against Shadow, sobbing. The shepherd lay down beside her, pressing his body close, licking her cheek until her sobs softened into hiccups. Daniel sank against the wall, lungs heaving, listening to the storm rage outside. Then, another sound. Faint, almost drowned by the tornado's roar. A voice. Daniel froze, straining his ears. "Help! Somebody, please!" Emily's head snapped up, eyes wide. "Someone else!" Shadow's ears pricked. He barked once, sharp, then bounded toward the far side of the barn. Daniel followed, flashlight beam cutting through dust until it landed on a trapdoor half hidden under fallen beams. He yanked at the wood, grunting as nails screeched. Together, he and Shadow dragged the debris clear. He wrenched the trapdoor open, stale air rushed up, carrying the sound of terrified sobs. Two children crouched in the shallow root cellar below, their faces streaked with dirt and tears. Daniel reached down, pulling them up one at a time. Emily gasped and hugged the younger one, a girl no older than 6. Shadow sniffed them over quickly, then pressed close as if counting them into his circle of protection. "Where's your family?" Daniel asked. The older boy's lips quivered. "Gone. The roof came off, we ran down here. Then it got stuck." Daniel's chest tightened. He put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You're safe now." The tornado roared again, closer this time. The barn shook violently, dust raining from the rafters. The world became chaos. Boards ripped free. Shingles clattered across the floor. The stone walls groaned, but still held. Emily screamed, clutching Shadow and the other children. Daniel threw himself over them, shielding them with his body as debris rained down. Shadow barked furiously into the storm, his voice a weapon against the noise. He planted his body over the children, pressing them low, his tail wrapping around Emily's knees like a tether. The tornado passed overhead. The barn quivered as if giants shook it. For a moment, Daniel thought the walls would collapse. He pressed tighter, teeth gritted, whispering, "Hold. Just hold." And then, just as suddenly, it shifted away. The roar faded, the ground's vibration eased. The barn sagged but stood. Rain hammered the roof in a steady rhythm once more. Silence returned, broken only by children's whimpers and Daniel's ragged breaths. Slowly, he lifted his head. Emily peeked out from under Shadow's chest. The shepherd's eyes glowed in the dim light, steady and fierce, his ears twitching for any new threat. He hadn't moved until he was sure the danger had passed. "You see?" Daniel whispered to the children. "The wind can take everything. But not him. Not while he's with us." Emily pressed her face into Shadow's neck, nodding through tears. He stayed. Shadow licked her cheek once, his tail wagging faintly despite exhaustion. Daniel leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment. His body was shaking, every muscle screaming for rest. But he knew the night wasn't over. The storm might come again. Rescue was still far away. Still, with Shadow pressed against them, the children finally stopped crying. Emily clutched her doll again, soaked, tattered, missing its button eye, but she held it tight as if it were whole. And for the first time that night, Daniel allowed himself a breath of fragile hope. The calm after the tornado didn't feel like safety, it felt like a trap. Daniel sat against the stone wall of the barn, every muscle in his body vibrating with exhaustion. Rain still poured through the holes in the roof, dripping down his face and soaking his uniform until it clung like lead. Emily leaned against his side, clutching her doll with one hand and Shadow's collar with the other. The two rescued children huddled close, their eyes darting to every creak of the barn. Shadow paced, his paws silent on the dirt floor. He moved in tight circles, ears twitching, nose constantly testing the air. The shepherd wouldn't lie down. Not yet. Not while the world above them still threatened to collapse. Daniel reached out and brushed his fingers along Shadow's damp fur. "Rest, boy. Just for a minute." Shadow stopped, met his eyes, and gave a low whine. His tail didn't wag. He knew. The storm wasn't finished. The first warning came as a groan deep in the stone. The barn's foundation trembled, a subtle shift at first. Then, with a deafening crack, a support beam split, showering them with splinters. Emily screamed. The younger girl buried her face in her brother's chest. Shadow barked, leaping toward the fallen timber, claws raking dirt as he braced against the vibration. Daniel shoved the children toward the far wall. "Stay low. Don't move unless I tell you." The roof sagged, a wide crack splitting the rafters. Wind howled through the gaps, carrying debris from the valley below. It wasn't the tornado this time, it was the aftermath. Gusts racing down the slopes, snapping what little remained of structures, hurling debris into the air like spears. Daniel knew the barn wouldn't last. One more push and it would collapse over them. He scanned the space, mind racing. The ridge climbed higher just beyond the barn. If they could reach the treeline, the stone outcrops there might offer cover from wind and falling debris. It wasn't safe, but it was better than waiting to be buried alive. He crouched low, cupping Emily's face in his hands. "Listen to me. We're moving again. You hold Shadow's harness and you don't let go. Understand?" Emily's eyes brimmed with tears, but she nodded. He turned to the other two children. You follow me. Stay between me and Shadow. No matter what happens, you move when he moves. The older boy swallowed hard. Okay. Shadow barked once, sharp, commanding. Even the children flinched at the sound, then nodded in obedience. Daniel ripped the beam from the door and shoved it open. The storm slammed into them instantly, a wall of wind and rain so strong it nearly knocked him backward. He gritted his teeth and forced it wide enough for them to slip through. Go, he shouted. Shadow bolted first, rope trailing from his harness, muscles surging as he led into the gale. Emily clung to his collar, her hair whipping across her face. The other two children stumbled behind, Daniel pushing them forward, shielding them from flying debris. The ridge was only 50 yards away, but in a storm, 50 yards might as well be miles. A gust tore shingles from the barn roof, hurling them like knives. One sliced across Daniel's arm, hot blood instantly washed away by rain. He bit down a curse, grabbed the boy by his collar, and shoved him forward. Shadow barked, darting sideways to knock Emily out of the path of a tumbling fence post. He grabbed her sleeve in his teeth, dragging her upright when she slipped in the mud. Every second was chaos, branches flying, debris slamming, the ground a river of muck. Halfway across, the barn gave up its fight. With a sound like the world ending, the roof tore free, beams collapsing inward. A wave of dust and splinters rolled across the ground, chasing them. Run! Daniel bellowed. Shadow snarled against the wind, dragging Emily with him. The children screamed, stumbling as Daniel shoved them ahead. He felt the blast of debris at his back, wood and stone battering his shoulders. Then, suddenly, Shadow veered right, barking furiously. Daniel looked, and saw it, a jagged gap in the ridge, a cleft between stone outcrops. Shelter! Go! He roared, shoving the children toward the gap. They dove inside just as the barn collapsed behind them. The crash shook the ground, the air filling with dust and splinters. The storm screamed overhead, but here, pressed between stone, they were shielded. Daniel slumped against the rock, dragging air into his lungs. The children huddled in the narrow space, eyes wide, coughing. Emily pressed herself against Shadow's chest, her doll squashed between them. The shepherd wrapped himself around her, chest heaving, his eyes still locked on the storm outside. Daniel rubbed his face with a shaking hand. We made it. Again. Emily's voice was small, trembling but certain. The wind took everything, but not him. Daniel looked at Shadow, who met his gaze with the same steady fire he'd seen all night. The shepherd's fur was matted, his body trembling from exhaustion, but he hadn't broken. He never would. The storm above still raged, but its fury was waning. The gusts came less often, the rain easing into a steady downpour. The night was almost over. Daniel reached out and rested his hand on Shadow's head. You kept them moving. You kept them alive. His voice cracked. I don't know how many more times I can say it, but you're the reason they'll see morning. Shadow pressed his nose into Daniel's palm, eyes half-lidded but unwavering. His tail thumped once against the stone. In the hollow of that ridge, with children pressed close and the storm roaring above, man and dog stood unbroken, proof that loyalty could hold against even the fiercest wind. The cleft in the ridge gave them a fragile moment of relief. The stone walls pressed close, shielding them from the worst of the gale. Rain still poured through cracks overhead, but compared to the chaos outside, it felt almost bearable. Emily curled into Shadow's side, the battered doll clutched between her arms. The two rescued children huddled against Daniel, shivering but alive. Daniel's chest heaved, his ribs sore with every breath, yet he forced his eyes to stay sharp. He knew storms, this one wasn't finished. Shadow knew it too. The shepherd's ears twitched constantly, his nose working, his body taut as a coiled spring. He wasn't resting. He was waiting. Daniel rubbed his damp hair back from his forehead. "It's fading," he told the children, though he didn't believe it fully. "Just hold on. Morning's coming." The older boy shook his head, eyes wide. "It sounds like it's getting louder." And he was right. The wind rose again, low at first, then building into a roar. It funneled through the valley, screaming across the ridge. The stone cleft shook, dust raining down from its jagged roof. Shadow barked sharply, spinning toward the opening. His tail stiffened, his hackles rose. A warning. Daniel pressed the children deeper into the rock. "Stay down. Hold on to each other." The roar became deafening. The storm had shifted. Not the wide funnel of the tornado this time, but something more violent in its concentration, a straight-line wind tearing down the slope, a wall of force with nothing to stop it. The cleft wasn't enough. The gust slammed into them like a giant's hand. Emily shrieked, nearly torn from the ground. Daniel lunged, arms locking around her waist. The other children clung to his back, screaming. Shadow hurled himself against Emily's legs, teeth clamping onto her sleeve. He anchored her to the ground as the gale tried to rip her free. His claws tore furrows in the dirt, his muscles straining with every ounce of strength he had left. Daniel's grip faltered. His boots slid in the mud. The wind screamed, battering him sideways. "Hold on," he roared, though his voice vanished in the storm. Shadow snarled, eyes blazing. He refused to let go. The gust dragged debris with it. Branches speared into the cleft. Shingles, boards, even a twisted metal sign slammed against the rock walls. One beam ricocheted inside, striking Daniel across the shoulder. Pain exploded white-hot, but he didn't release Emily. The younger girl sobbed, clinging to Shadow's tail. The older boy pressed against Daniel's back, his thin arms trembling as he tried to hold the soldier steady. Another blast hit. Daniel's boots left the ground. For a terrifying moment, he felt the storm's claws closing around them, ready to tear them into the sky. Then Shadow lunged deeper into the cleft, dragging Emily and, with her, Daniel and the others. His teeth clenched tighter on her sleeve, his growl vibrating like thunder. His body became the anchor, their only tether to earth. Daniel slammed into the wall, breath knocked from him. But they were still there. Still alive. Because Shadow refused to yield. The wind shrieked one final time, a roar so violent the stone itself groaned. And then, as suddenly as it had come, it passed. Silence fell. Real silence. Not the trick silence of the eye, but the heavy, exhausted silence of a storm that had burned itself out. Rain still pattered, but softer now. No more screaming wind. No more collapsing beams. Only the ragged sound of human breathing. Daniel slid to the ground, clutching Emily against his chest. His whole body trembled from fatigue and pain. Emily lifted her face, streaked with mud and tears. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "He didn't let go. He saved me." Daniel turned his head, eyes falling on Shadow. The shepherd lay sprawled in the dirt, chest heaving, fur matted with mud. His jaws still clamped around Emily's sleeve, even though the wind was gone. Only when Daniel gently touched his muzzle did Shadow release, panting hard, eyes half-lidded but still alert. Daniel pressed his forehead against the dog's. His voice was raw. "You held us all. You held the whole world together." Shadow whined softly, then thumped his tail once against the dirt. The children crowded around, hugging Shadow, their small hands tangling in his soaked fur. Even the older boy, who had been silent and stiff with fear, whispered hoarsely, "He's stronger than the storm." Daniel sat back against the stone, his arm wrapped around all three children, Shadow pressed against his knees. Above them, the clouds began to break, the first pale glow of dawn bleeding into the sky. They had survived the night. But deep in his bones, Daniel knew it wasn't just survival. It was something more, a bond proven in fire, water, and wind. A reminder that loyalty, once given, could outlast anything. The storm had taken homes, trees, and lives. But it had not taken the one thing it wanted most, hope. Because Shadow had refused to let go. The storm was finally gone. Its roar faded into the distance, leaving behind a strange, aching quiet. Only the patter of soft rain remained, dripping from broken branches and trickling down the stone cleft where they huddled. Daniel lifted his head, chest heaving. Every muscle in his body ached, but his instincts wouldn't let him rest yet. He scanned the ridge, ears straining for danger. Nothing but the faint creak of broken trees and the whimper of tired children. Shadow lay in front of Emily, his chest rising and falling like bellows. His paws trembled from the fight, but his eyes never left the cleft's opening. Even after dragging them through the worst wind of their lives, he still held guard. Daniel pressed his hand against the shepherd's side. "Easy, partner. We made it." Emily stirred, her voice soft as a breath. "Is it really over?" Daniel's gaze shifted to the horizon. Clouds broke apart, gray giving way to streaks of pale gold. The first fragile light of dawn spilled across Miller's Creek. "Yeah," he said at last. "It's over." The sound came faint at first, like dragonflies buzzing over water. Then louder, rhythmic, unmistakable. Whoop whoop whoop. Emily sat upright. "What's that?" Daniel's tired face broke into the faintest smile. "Rescue." A helicopter crested the ridge, its searchlight cutting through fog. Another followed behind it, then a third. Their beams swept over the valley, across shattered houses and drowned streets, finally finding the ridge. One spotlight lingered on the stone cleft. Shadow barked, his voice hoarse but commanding, carrying high above the valley. The helicopters answered with flashing strobes. Minutes later, the rumble of engines joined the air. Rescue trucks crawled through what was left of the northern road, tires slipping in mud. Boats launched from trailers, surging into the waterlogged streets. First responders in bright jackets spread across the ridge like ants. Daniel rose unsteadily, Emily still clutched against him. The other children clung to his sleeves, eyes wide with hope for the first time all night. Shadow circled them, barking again, as if telling the rescuers exactly where to come. A medic scrambled up the slope. "Survivors here," he shouted, waving. More followed, carrying blankets and stretchers. Daniel handed Emily down gently. "Go with them. You're safe now." But she shook her head, refusing to let go of Shadow's collar. "Not without him." The medic blinked, then smiled faintly. "Then he comes too." Within minutes, the children were wrapped in blankets, checked for injuries, and given warm sips of water. Emily sat with Shadow's head in her lap, stroking his fur, whispering to him. The shepherd finally let himself rest, eyelids drooping, tail tapping weakly against the ground. Daniel leaned against a tree, one arm bandaged hastily by a paramedic. He should have felt relief. He should have let the exhaustion take him. But his eyes kept scanning the valley, heart heavy with the weight of what was gone. The town was wrecked. Whole streets flattened, homes erased. Smoke curled from the ruins of the mill. The river glimmered like a scar, swollen and dark. Pete climbed the ridge, his jacket ripped, mud caked to his boots. His eyes widened when he saw Daniel. "You're alive." "Barely," Daniel rasped. Pete's gaze shifted to Shadow, who lay in Emily's lap, still watching the horizon even as he drifted. "And him?" Daniel's throat tightened. He rested a hand on the shepherd's side. "He never quit. Not once." The survivors gathered on the ridge as more helicopters circled overhead. Families embraced, weeping. Names were called out, some answered, others not. But amidst the grief, there was gratitude. Whispers spread quickly, "The soldier and the dog, They pulled them out, they never let go. Emily stood, clutching her doll in one hand and Shadow's collar in the other. She walked up to Daniel, her small face streaked with soot and tears. "You said the wind takes everything," she whispered. "But it didn't take him. Or you." Daniel knelt, his voice raw. "No. Because he stayed. And I had to stay too." She hugged him fiercely. Then, without hesitation, she bent and hugged Shadow, pressing her doll against his fur. The shepherd sighed, eyes half closed, but his tail wagged once. As dawn grew brighter, Daniel finally allowed himself to breathe. He sat beside Shadow, their shoulders pressed together, watching the valley slowly emerge from the fog. The wind had torn Miller's Creek apart, scattered lives, and crushed homes. But it had failed in the one way that mattered most. It hadn't taken her. Because the dog had stayed. The ridge slowly emptied as rescue teams guided families down the slope. Trucks rumbled across the ruined roads, carrying the injured toward the high school gym, now converted into a makeshift shelter. Helicopters ferried others to the nearest hospital, their engines growling like tired giants against the dawn. Daniel walked beside Emily, her hand clutching both his sleeve and Shadow's collar. The other two children stayed close behind, wrapped in blankets, eyes hollow but no longer wild with fear. Shadow limped slightly, his paws raw from the night's battles, but he still kept his head high, scanning every corner as though the storm might try one last ambush. The gym was chaos, cots lined row after row, volunteers carrying trays of water, nurses darting between patients. The air smelled of wet clothes, antiseptic, and the faint sting of smoke drifting from the valley below. As Daniel led the children inside, heads turned. Whispers followed them. "That's him. The soldier. The dog. They say he pulled kids out of the storm." The shepherd wouldn't let go. Daniel ignored the voices. He guided the children to a corner cot where medics could check them over. Emily refused to sit until Shadow lay down first. Only then did she curl against his side, pressing her doll into his chest like a badge of victory. A nurse approached Daniel with a clipboard. "You're injured." "It's nothing," he muttered. His arm throbbed where the beam had struck, blood seeping through the hastily wrapped bandage, but compared to what others had lost, it felt small. She frowned. "You need stitches." Daniel waved her off. "Later. Check the kids first." The nurse sighed but moved to Emily, gently lifting her chin, brushing damp hair from her face. Emily clung to Shadow's collar, refusing to be separated. The dog didn't move, didn't flinch. He let the nurse work, his eyes locked on Daniel the whole time. "She's okay," the nurse murmured. "Bruised, exhausted, dehydrated, but okay." Daniel's shoulders sagged. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding himself until that moment. Hours blurred into one another. Volunteers brought food, though most survivors were too numb to eat. Doctors moved between rows of cots, their voices low, their hands brisk. The storm had left no family untouched. Daniel sat on a bench near Shadow's cot. The shepherd lay stretched out, his paws bandaged, a shallow cut stitched across his flank. He was finally sleeping, but not deeply. Every sound made his ears twitch. Emily sat beside him, her small hand resting on his chest, rising and falling with every breath. She hadn't spoken much since dawn. The doll was tucked under her chin, its missing eyes staring blankly, its seams frayed. At last, she looked at Daniel. "He stayed with me the whole night." Daniel nodded, his throat tight. "That's who he is." She tilted her head. "Would you have stayed too?" He paused, then met her gaze. "I had to. Because he stayed first. He never quits. And that means I can't, either." Emily seemed to consider that. Then she leaned forward and whispered into Shadow's ear, "You're braver than the storm." The shepherd's tail thumped once, even in sleep. Later, Pete found Daniel sitting alone outside the gym, the evening sun turning the soaked earth to gold. "You look like hell," Pete said. Daniel managed a tired smirk. "You should see the storm." Pete sat beside him, silent for a while. Then he asked, "Why'd you go back? After you'd already made it out, you could have stayed safe." Daniel's eyes drifted toward the gym where Shadow and the children rested. "Because she was still in there. Because he went." He exhaled. "You don't walk away when your partner charges into the dark. You follow." Pete nodded slowly. "Guess that's why people are already calling him the hero of Miller's Creek." Daniel shook his head. "Not me?" Pete chuckled. "Maybe you too. But mostly him." Daniel smiled faintly. "That's how it should be." Night settled. The shelter lights buzzed, casting long shadows across rows of cots. Survivors whispered in low voices, clinging to one another. Some cried quietly into blankets. Others stared at nothing, numb with loss. But in one corner, there was a different sound, the steady rhythm of a dog's breathing. Shadow slept with his head across Emily's legs, her hand tangled in his fur. The rescued children curled nearby, safe within the circle he made. Daniel sat in a chair beside them, his body slumped in exhaustion, but his eyes watching, always watching. The storm had taken so much: homes, neighbors, pieces of lives they could never rebuild. But it had left them this, proof that loyalty and courage could still stand when everything else fell. And as the night deepened, Miller's Creek found something it hadn't known it still possessed: hope. Morning came clear and bright, as though the storm had never existed. The sky was washed clean, streaked with pale blue, the air heavy with the smell of wet earth and splintered wood. From the ridge above Miller's Creek, the view was unrecognizable: streets gone, houses flattened, the river swollen and snarling through fields where children once played. But on the steps of the high school gym, survivors gathered, faces lifted to the light. The storm had taken almost everything. And yet, they were still here. Daniel stood at the edge of the parking lot, arms crossed against his chest, exhaustion pressing deep into his bones. Bandages wrapped his arm and shoulder, but the real ache lay deeper, somewhere words couldn't reach. He looked out over the town and thought of all the times he had come home from war, telling himself nothing could shake him again. The storm had proved him wrong. Beside him sat Shadow, a thick bandage on his flank, paws wrapped but sturdy. The shepherd's fur was still matted from rain and blood, but his eyes were sharp, alive. His ears flicked constantly, scanning every voice, every movement, as if the storm might return. Emily sat in the grass in front of him, her knees drawn to her chest, doll tucked safely under her chin. She was quiet, as she had been since dawn, but her hand never left Shadow's collar. It was as if the dog were the last thread tying her to this world, and maybe he was. By mid-morning, relief trucks arrived. Volunteers handed out bottled water, sandwiches, clean clothes. Families who had been separated through the night found one another in tearful embraces. The gym filled with a chorus of names shouted, some answered, some met with silence. And through it all, whispers spread like fire. The soldier and the dog. They pulled children from the storm. The shepherd never let go. Daniel tried to ignore the murmurs, but every time someone passed, their eyes lingered on Shadow. Parents pressed hands to their mouths. Children, even through their fear, reached out tentative fingers to stroke the shepherd's fur. Shadow accepted them all, but his gaze always drifted back to Emily. She hugged him tighter. "He's mine now," she said with quiet certainty. Daniel crouched beside her, meeting her eyes. "He's everyone's. But yes, he'll always be yours." Reporters arrived before noon, their cameras clicking. They tried to press Daniel for quotes, but he shook his head. "Talk to them," he said, pointing toward the families, the children. "They're the story." Still, the cameras found Shadow. They always would. The image of the shepherd, fur torn but eyes burning, became the face of Miller's Creek's survival. One journalist crouched near Emily. "What saved you, sweetheart? Was it the shelter? The soldier?" Emily held her doll tighter, then pressed her cheek against Shadow's head. "No. It was him. The wind took everything else, but he stayed with me." The shepherd lifted his head at her words, ears tall, as though he understood. That night, the shelter quieted. Families finally slept. Volunteers slumped in chairs. For the first time in 2 days, the storm's roar was just a memory. Daniel sat against the wall, Shadow stretched beside him, Emily curled on the shepherd's chest like he was her bed. The other rescued children lay nearby, their breaths even, finally at peace. Pete came and lowered himself onto the bench beside Daniel. "You know," he said, his voice rough, "people are saying Miller's Creek is going to rebuild stronger than before." Daniel's eyes drifted to the sleeping forms of children and dog. "Then it starts with them." Pete nodded. "Funny thing. A town can lose houses, roads, even whole streets. But it only dies when it loses hope. You two brought it back." Daniel said nothing, just reached down to scratch behind Shadow's ears. The shepherd shifted, half asleep, tail tapping softly against the floor. Weeks later, Miller's Creek began to rise again. Neighbors hauled debris together, hammered new beams, raised new walls. The sound of hammers replaced the roar of wind. And at the center of it all, there was always a dog. Children clung to him as they played near construction sites. Families brought him scraps of food and fresh water bowls. The old and the young alike reached down to brush their hands across his fur. Daniel watched it happen, a faint smile tugging his tired face. Shadow had always been his partner. But now, he belonged to all of them. One evening, Emily tugged Daniel's sleeve. "Do you think he remembers? The night the wind came?" Daniel crouched, meeting her eyes. "He remembers everything. That's why he'll never leave your side." Emily pressed her doll into Shadow's chest and whispered, "You're braver than the storm." Shadow's ears perked. His tail wagged once, strong and certain. The storm had come to take everything. But the morning belonged to them. Because when the wind screamed and the world tore apart, a soldier stood. And a dog stayed.